All right, it's time to get a little emotional on part 2 of the Sonic Adventure 2 retrospective that I'm making, because I just went over some of the stuff in the gameplay mechanics that I liked, didn't like, but now I really wanted to talk about the real stuff, the story, the substance behind all of it, because as I was watching Sonic 3, you know how I always talk about, well, not always, I mean, this is the first time I've talked about how the Sonic movies are still able to maintain a little bit of originality, but they still pay homage to all the source material. The one thing that I was worried about is, are they going to mess up Shadow the Hedgehog? And I'll finish off with that. But you know what? I'm happy to say that they didn't. Now, obviously, I was a little bit nervous because, of all the characters, Knuckles in Sonic 2 was definitely the most questionable one, because although Knuckles is probably the most dense, he's not completely like he was in the movies, where he's almost like a childlike naivete with fists. Man, I am making up my own words on the fly, aren't I? But I'm happy to say that with the whole situation with Shadow, they kept probably 95% of what he is. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the movies, I want to talk about the game, but let's get into overall the tone that is Sonic Adventure 2, shall we? Obviously, there's a hero storyline and then a villain storyline, and they go into one final battle at the end together as a team. But, you could see where they fall differently on the timeline of Sonic Adventure 2 and where they converge. Obviously, the villain story arc starts as right before the hero story arc, where you see all the setups and everything like that on the villain side, and then the heroes come in later. But that's if you're playing as the villains, and the heroes, obviously you start at Sonic being kidnapped by the GUN organization, but he's here to solve the mystery of why they've made him their number one wanted list. But as he goes into it, obviously, he finds a bigger plot by the Eggman to hold the world hostage with the Eclipse Cannon. You know what made this story so unique, though, was the music and the soundtrack. Because as these games play out, every character has his own unique, or her own unique structure and music style that carries through all their things. Like Knuckles, Rouge, Tails, Eggman, Sonic and Shadow, they all have different tones. You could even see this comparing their counterparts. Eggman seems like a little bit heavier rock, while Tails is more of an emotional style skater rock. Sonic is, again, kind of skater rock, but then Shadow is this dark, dismal type music. Now, I can't play any of these because of copyright, right? But Knuckles has obviously rap themes in the back, while Rouge is more of like a diva-ish kind, like Spice Girls. I just think that each one has their own unique music style that fits the character, especially Shadow. I'm going to be talking a lot about Shadow throughout this time, but his music, I'm going to be honest and say that this really does show as if you are in the psyche of someone who is psychologically tortured like he is. Basically, if there was a music style that would demonstrate the psyche of someone who has been to HE double hockey sticks and back, you would get Shadow the Hedgehog's themes in Sonic Adventure 2. In fact, Shadow is definitely the most highlighted character in this whole game. But let's go into overall as the story converges into one gigantic arc and it all comes together. That's where the theme of the story really comes into play. And that's probably what you could say is lacking about the story, is a lot of its action sequences and good guy versus bad guy, a little generic until you get to the end. And then they basically give you a different note of a deeper meaning on doing the right thing, even if you're bad. And you could also say that that theme is also overdone. But honestly, if you do it right, like this game does, I really don't think it matters. But the last episode plays out very quickly, and you play as all 6 of the characters. Now, the first 5, obviously, as they're all trying to find the cannon's core, and then at the end, you see Shadow waiting on the sideline saying, you know what, I don't like people regardless. They treated me like garbage. Let's just let it all happen. And then Amy comes in and gives a talk to Shadow. That gives him a change of heart, and he comes in right at the end of the game when they need him most. A bio lizard that was his prototype, and I don't know how they're related or how Gerald Robotnik went from BioLizard to Shadow, but it just kind of works in a way where obviously I couldn't see any other character being as powerful enough to take on this BioLizard as Shadow the Hedgehog. But he's the one who really turns the tide when push is coming to shove. Then after he takes out the BioLizard, they go for one final push with Super Sonic and Super Shadow with the Chaos Emeralds against the station. And it's actually Shadow who sacrifices himself for a species that he's never really had a reason to enjoy. And this is where I talk about it feels like Shadow was intended to be the main character or the main focus of this game regardless. Although it's a Sonic title in the title name, Shadow was the guy who had the big arc, while everyone else kind of just felt like a side character. All the emotional weight was on Shadow, especially in the villain story arc, and sometimes in the hero story arc. If you played the whole game, you feel his presence afterwards in the hero story arc. But he does have a highly compelling story about doing the right thing, even though you don't feel like you owe the world anything. Being guided by self-interest, anger, and resentment because that's what you've been showed your entire existence, only to have a last-minute change of heart because the one person that you actually cared about is in your mind and helped you remember the promise that you made to her. And yeah, no, of course, Shadow probably wouldn't have done it if he had never had Maria around. But the one bright star in his life ended up actually being the thing that changed his mind and got him to start thinking less selfish. And obviously Shadow the Hedgehog does return in future titles, but I remember the first time I played this game, Shadow seemed to have actually sacrificed himself to the point where we weren't going to see him ever again. I mean, obviously we did, and he made future appearances, like I said before, but the emotional weight I remember feeling as a kid when I first played this, I really did genuinely feel bad for Shadow, and he actually ended up being my favorite character of all time in Sonic lore. And yeah, obviously future renditions of Shadow the Hedgehog just, they were never the same. They were never as good as this one, and I think that this is why Sonic 3 was a love letter to Sonic Adventure 2, is because this was the most compelling Shadow story arc that they could copy from. I'm going to call it copy, tweak, and paste. But I don't know how to close this video without getting a little too personal. In my honest deposition, I believe that's how I say it. But as a kid, I was rather isolated, like Shadow. And I think this is why I related to him. And like Shadow, a lot of my wanting to be accepted soon turned into anger. You're put through a lot of systems where you feel more like a side project than an actual human being, just like Shadow the Hedgehog. And one day you just kind of give up and say, you know what, I'm not going to try to be a good person anymore because I'm going to be looked at as bad no matter what, that you start playing into the role of the bad guy. Not because you feel like you have a choice, but it's the only shoe that conceivably fits, even though it's not the shoe you want to fit. And you think that this is as good as life's ever going to allow you to be. But years later, you find the right group of people after being in this low frequency for so long that eventually they bring out the better side of you and give you a reason to continue fighting and to continue being better. Now, obviously, the angry look didn't disappear overnight. It was a long, ironed out process, but like Shadow, it eventually happened. And I think a lot of you people who love Shadow the Hedgehog have probably felt like he does in some way, shape, or form. But this story hits from nearly every angle, and although, like I said, Sonic was not the main character in the game, he was the title character. Well, the main character in the game was definitely Shadow. And I think it plays into the end of the game, Live and Learn, where it talks about learning your lessons. And let me tell you one thing that I learned from this game is that it's amazing how one game that's as 8-bit seeming as it does today compared to some of the other graphical masterpieces we've got tended to resonate with a whole generation of kids who, honestly, looking back, didn't have a whole lot of guidance and the lessons we wanted to learn. I think video games taught us a lot of those. But that's all I kind of got to say, and it seems like I'm landing this plane abruptly, but I do enjoy this story, and I do enjoy playing this game, and after seeing Sonic 3, playing Sonic Adventure 2 again and really trying to digest and find something new to take from this story that I haven't taken before, I think now I finally got it and have been able to put it into words. But thank you guys very much for watching this two-parter. I'll see you guys on the next one. And when I play something else that I haven't played for a while, I'll be the first to let you know. But peace out.